Hi, I'm Andrew Wasson. Thanks for tuning in once again to my weekly guitar blog, where I go over a series of questions that I select from the guitar blog website at andrewwasson.com. These are questions that I think are interesting, but they actually didn't make it to be video topics in their entirety on the Creative Guitar Studio YouTube channel. So we're going to start off. I don't have a lot of time today. I've got a gig tonight and things are pretty busy. So I'm going to start off with our first question, which is coming to us from Daniel out in Buenos, Argentina. I feel like I'm stuck playing guitar. I played guitar for almost 3 years. I'm taking lessons with a teacher. We've seen techniques like alternate picking, sweep picking, string skipping, tapping, legato. And we also cover some of the basics of guitar theory in order to improvise. The thing is, I don't see that I'm improving in my guitar playing. I try to play every day. Should I change to another teacher? And how do I know if this teacher is a good one? Well, thanks very much for writing in, Daniel. You know, when you look at something like feelings that people have about their own sense of progress, one of the ideas you have to kind of watch out for is self-talk. A lot of psychologists, I think, out there would call it how you speak to yourself in your own mind. Now, if you're the type of person that needs a lot of instant gratification, sometimes the learning curve goes so slow with learning a musical instrument that you really struggle and you really fight to be able to stay on track. Now, for other folks, they have this really carefree attitude of, oh, I don't care how long it takes. If it takes me 3 weeks to learn a concept, that's fine. If it takes me 3 months, that's okay too. So there's all these different kinds of self-talk scenarios that people are going through. So first of all, take into account how you're speaking to yourself and what you're thinking about in terms of your own personal progress. Now, with that aside, with that sort of self-check out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what I think are really important for new students when they practice and study guitar. Now, when I get together with folks at my studio when they're brand new students, I talk a lot about the neck's layout. I want to make sure that students are aware of all the names of the open strings right across the guitar. I want them to know what the numbering is, how to associate numbering both horizontally as well as vertically for string sets. So if I think about it in a big sense, what I want them to be able to know very quickly when we have our discussions in our guitar lessons is if I say to a student, hey, I need you to get over there to the 4th string, 7th fret. And, you know, I find that once I got someone into position, they get to know note names fairly quickly. But it's this idea of getting people into position, especially beginners, you know, and even some intermediate students, they're still getting used to some of the basics of the fingerboard layout. It can be kind of an enormous, overwhelming amount of information on this grid. Now, some people work really well with grids, you know, but other people don't. Just like some people work really well with graphs and other people don't. So what we have to get together as a communications tool is I need people to be able to get into position quickly. So I do a lot of rehearsal about note names, about areas and, you know, sort of the axis of notes, how we're going and creating locations on the fingerboard. I also want students to be well aware of the range of the guitar. You know, that's why teaching new students how to tune by ear is so important. It's that idea of going to the 5th fret of a lower pitched string and then giving the note off that 5th fret to the next string open. The only place where that changes is on the 3rd string, where we drift down to the 4th fret of the 3rd string, and that happens to be the equivalent note in unison to the 2nd string open. So that kind of 5th fret layout thing really just goes and moves itself along the guitar. So let's say, for instance, if I had an E note and I go 5 frets higher, my E note is in unison is actually located on the 5th fret of the next string over. Then you go about 4 or 5 frets, you know, continue along the neck, and you just keep getting these same E notes. And these are identical E notes. I know they have a little bit different quality to them because as the string gets thicker in diameter as we go lower, and as the string length of vibrating string gets shorter, we get a little bit fuzzier tone out of that note. But they all are indeed the same note. Now, so teaching unisons, teaching how to get into the fingerboard, all this stuff is huge stuff for me. So hopefully, Daniel, you've done that stuff. Now, once that's coming together as well, I like students to be aware of how notes interlock and form a grid across the neck with one pitch. So we'll do that kind of work. For instance, here's an F down off 1st fret, but I can do an F pattern into the 3rd and 6th frets of the 4th and the 2nd strings. Then I can move that F pattern along into the 6th position, then the 8th position, and then the 10th position. So this kind of work, you know, instantly gets people to understand and recognize that the octave point in a linear sense is at the 12th fret. And then, you know, aside from that, the other stuff is understanding how scales and arpeggios fit onto the guitar. Then there's other subjects that we get into along the way, like music reading, music theory, some work on ear training, and eventually as the skills grow, we expand, we go into the realms of understanding how to do improvisation. And another element which I think is so important, I always stress with students around here, is learning songs. I cannot stress that enough. The more songs you learn, the better the player you will become. It's just constant, never-ending ideas that are getting thrown your way when you're going through tune by tune and learning how songs go. Plus, you expose yourself to all kinds of directions of guitar playing technique. So one thing in your email, Daniel, that you did not mention, however, there is learning songs. So the other stuff you went over sounds like a lot of technique, and what was the other element in it? I just want to double check the other idea. Guitar theory and how to get into the realms of improvising. And just thinking about my course of action with teaching compared to the course of action you're getting here, you know, in your lessons, the thing that kind of strikes me as funny is with 3 years under your belt, I don't know how well the scales and arpeggios would be at a level, and you know, I don't even know what kind of an approach that you're getting for improvisation. That's a very tough subject to teach. I would probably say 3 years in, yeah, maybe starting at getting some application, but I would hope that at 3 years in of playing, you've also learned a ton of songs. If that song building category isn't really well developed for you, you're going to find this batch of information that this particular guitar teacher is working on with you to be a little bit much. Now, here's some tips for you about finding another teacher if you do decide to pursue that avenue. Number one, always ask yourself with any teacher that you're doing some instruction with if you feel like you're getting your money's worth. That's very crucial, because if you don't really feel like that, if you don't find you can communicate very well with the person, it may be best for both parties for you to just move on and find somebody different. Now, second thing, take a break from lessons, perhaps for about 2 or 3 weeks or even a month if that's the way the policies of the studio of the teacher you're heading into. You know, if that's their policies where you can only take a month off at a time or so, do that. Take a break from it. Look around a little bit. Maybe have a meeting or two with some other folks. Ask around other guitar players. Maybe when you're at a club checking out a band, if you see a good guitarist, go up to the person and ask them, hey, where are you taking lessons, or can you recommend a teacher? That kind of stuff really will aid you. It'll usually tune you in real quick to who the real top-notch guitar players are around the city that you live. So those are my tips for you. It's a lot of stuff, but really take it to heart. I think that you may be sitting on the fence of perhaps taking a break from the teacher you're with and checking out a few other people. Perhaps after you check out some other people, you may decide to go back to the original person you're with now, and maybe not. You may find somebody that you feel is better. Okay, anyway, I hope that helps you. Let's head over to the next question. Now, this next upcoming question comes to us from Robert out in Manchester in the United Kingdom. He wrote in saying, when starting with fingerstyle, where would be best to start from? Simple arpeggios or chords? Now, for this question, I guess what might be kind of good is to switch guitars over. So I'm going to do that. And when it comes around to the whole idea of getting into fingerstyle guitar, I think it's very important to look at things in terms of a well-balanced workflow that you're going to set up for yourself. Playing fingerstyle is definitely a little bit different than playing flat pick style. So it's a little bit more involved. You have to track out your fingerings and so on. And I think if you set up a workflow of material, that will really help you a lot. And what I am getting at with that is make sure you're dividing up your time in your workday and having a set system of what you want to cover. Now, I've always found for fingerstyle guitar, there's three things that have helped me out a lot. It is very good to begin with chords. And when I say chords, I mean breaking them apart and doing an arpeggiated idea. Now, your question was a little bit unclear to me because when you're thinking about arpeggios, I mean, I think of arpeggios as almost more of a single note line idea as opposed to arpeggiating a chord, something like that, where you're actually breaking the chord tones apart and you're creating possibly some kind of a finger picking pattern in there. Now, my answer for you overall is to set up a couple of exercise routines. I think you should work a little bit on exercises that have to do with individual fingering concepts. So something like the chromatic study where you play fret by fret and just use index and middle fingers. If you also want to try a little bit of thumb and index, that's a good balance too. Now, the classical guitar technique is a little bit more in the direction of index and middle fingers, but work on the single note line playing as part of your balanced workflow of time for your fingerstyle. Now, the other thing I should mention with this I think is really important, if you already know all of your basic open position chords on the guitar, if you're pretty decent at those, work on some exercises of mixing and matching chords, come up with some progressions for yourself, and start designing exercise routines with your basic chords. Now, if you also know chords along the neck, you know, the various movable shapes, and you can work along the neck with barred chords and movable chord shapes, get into some exercise work with that as well, because that's going to do a lot of good for your strengthening of your left hand, your fretboard hand. Now, when it also comes around to this idea of gaining technique, better fingerstyle technique in the fastest, shortest possible way, again, this is bringing us full circle back to what we had talked about a little bit with the last question, and that has to do with learning songs. One thing I remember quite a long time ago when I first started getting into fingerstyle guitar, one of my friends, I believe, just when I was a teenager, had actually shot me a pretty cool fingerstyle picking book. It was quite easy. The tunes were quite simple to get into, but I really got a lot out of it because it began introducing me to not only other kinds of chords and different kinds of harmonies, because the songs were obviously introducing different playing situations, but it also got me going on trying different techniques because it was a fingerstyle book and it had all the PIMA fingering. If you're not familiar with that, that's the Spanish fingering layout, and it's the commonplace fingering that you got to get to know for all the charts and work that you'll have on fingerstyle guitar. P stands for thumb, I is index finger, M is middle finger, A is for annular or ring finger, and then CH, the baby finger. The word for small in Spanish is chico. So CH, A, M, I, and P are your playing hand fingers that you got to get used to understanding how they're laid out. Now, I do have several fingerstyle guitar lessons on my Creative Guitar Studio YouTube channel, so definitely sift through those, get some ideas. I've got everything from Christmas carol pieces to some of my original pieces, and I've even got a fingerstyle guitar lesson plan that's on my site. You can purchase that. It's very inexpensive, and it should start getting you in the direction of helping you with this material. So just to recap, start with creating a very well-balanced workflow of material for dividing up your days with various techniques that you're going to study. This will help accelerate you in the fastest, shortest possible time to get this fingerstyle technique to a decent level for you. Okay, let's head over to the next question. And this one here, this is the last question I have time for today. It's coming to us from Jordan in Baltimore, Maryland. He's writing in saying, my question is regarding notation. Is it realistic for a guitarist that practices notation a decent amount every day to expect to be as proficient at sight reading as a good clarinet player or violinist who seem to be automatic no matter what piece of notated music you put in front of them? Okay, before we go to the next part of the question, because there is another part here, let me quickly address this. Now, although guitar sight reading does take longer because we have things like unisons and we've got a neck that we break apart into sections to look at the chart notation and figure out from the chart where we're going to assign the music reading notation to the neck. So although it's a little bit more involved on guitar because of all the unisons that we have, any good player that's got some decent work behind them in music reading should be able to get their chops up to a level where within, let's say, a minute or two, they can look down a chart, give it a scan through, understand where the lowest notes are, the highest notes are, how they're going to lay those notes out onto their fingerboard, and basically get everything organized on their neck to hopefully be able to play it in about 2 to 3 minutes time. They should be able to start running through performances and within a couple of minutes have it down good enough where they could hopefully record it if they had to. Now, so that kind of takes care of the first part of the question. Yes, you can certainly become as proficient a sight reader as any other musician on any other instrument. You just have to know what you're doing when it comes to music reading. I've got a whole series of music reading videos on my Creative Guitar Studio YouTube channel. Definitely check those out. They are going to probably clear up a lot of mysteries for you. In fact, I'll put the link to the first level video in the information box underneath this YouTube video here. Now let's move on to the next part of this question. In the second half, it says, also when I look at a piece of notated music, should I look at it from the viewpoint of just C major scale and go and deal with accidentals as they come along? Or should I view it based on whatever key signature the song is in? Meaning if the song is in D major, I would view it from the D major scale. Now, I was going to go and switch out on guitars one last time here. But what I would do is basically take a look at it in terms of getting a handle on what's going on with the key in relationship to the scale on the fingerboard. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say that you are in the key of D major, because this was in your question there. D major scale has a pattern in every range and location on the neck. So if I'm in second position, there's a D major scale pattern layout in that particular position that is unique to D major. If I happen to be around fourth or fifth position, there's a unique D major scale pattern that is tuned up to that area of the neck. If I happen to be in seventh position, there's a D major scale there too. And so on and so on. Every location that you go and lay out a scale on the fretboard, you have the opportunity to read a piece of music there. So what this means in reality is the geometry of the scale shape on the guitar fingerboard plays a definite role with your music reading. So you'll get your new chart, your new tune, you look at the key signature, it perhaps says D major, and you start looking and seeing what the highest note in the song is, you look and see what the lowest note is, and you've determined your range. Then when you're in your range of your neck that you know will be very appropriate for reading that piece of music, at that point, what you can do is just lay out the D scale. Let's say, for instance, the highest pitch in the tune was maybe C sharp. So you know now that you're going to be probably up around 9th fret perhaps for that C sharp, and maybe let's say the lowest possible tone was, well, let's say A, because if it was A, it would be right in this range that I'm playing right now. This A at the 6th string, 5th fret, does not occur anywhere else except for open 5th string. So there's a possibility of using it there, of course, but I would probably, if I saw a tune where the lowest pitch in the tune was the low A there, and then I had a highest note of perhaps C sharp up at 9th fret of 1st string, I think I would kind of go with around 4th or 5th position, which therefore would mean I would use a pattern of D major scale based upon the 5th fret of the 5th string, as well as the 7th fret of the 3rd string octave, and this would give me my template for the D major scale in that range. So I know exactly how to go through my scale and tune up the geometry of the notes on the neck to how and where I'm going to be playing it off that chart. So this obviously means you've got to know your scale patterns on your neck pretty darn good, because they play a role, again, for how you're tuning yourself into your song that you're practicing and you're going to be studying. So definitely you wouldn't look at every single song as the key of C major. You would look at the song to the key that it's particular for, and then you would use the knowledge of your guitar scales on the fingerboard to be able to tune yourself into what's going on with that song. So hopefully that helps you out. And that brings us to the end of all the time that I have for this particular video. I want to thank you for watching and of course for sending in all of the great questions. And keep in mind, I now have a weekly podcast that comes out every Monday. You'll find that in the podcast section of my blog site at andrewwasson.com. Until next time, take care everybody. We'll catch up with you again on my next video blog. Bye for now.